The Once and Future King by T.H. White has gone down in history as one of the best retellings of the legend of King Arthur. It's a collection of 4 different books telling one continuous story which delves into various themes about leadership, knighthood, and justice. Read about Lancelot, a flawed and imperfect human doing his best to be worthy of his seat at Arthur's round table, and the consequences that come about when his shortcomings and aspirations clash together. T.H. White spares no expense in putting forth a strong argument for the virtuous ideals of a chivalrous knight, while at the same time satirizing many of those same ideals. There are many ways to interpret this story, and regardless of its depiction of human faults, I couldn't help but walk away with a strong appreciation for the tenets that a classical knight is supposed to aspire to, those of integrity, honor, and using might as a tool for peace and justice rather than tyranny. It gave me somewhat of a soft fascination with knights, and as I looked about for more entertainment prominently featuring knights, it dawned on me that most things tend to focus on the strength and combat prowess that knights are supposed to have and delve very little on the themes of duty, honor, and similar virtues. Now listen, I'm not saying that stuff doesn't exist, there's definitely stuff out there, but for example, let's look at games. As far as games prominently featuring knights, what comes to mind? Shovel Knight? Hollow Knight? Dark Souls? Well, these are fantastic games. They don't really explore the previously mentioned themes of chivalry and knighthood on a deep level. All I'm saying is that as games come on my radar that have anything to do with knights, something in the back of my mind perks up and wonders if it'll deal with the aspects of knighthood that appear to be less common and that I personally really enjoy. Well, stepping up to the dais, receiving the accolade of knighthood, we have the Night Witch.
As fate would have it, we came across this game for the first time at the Tokyo Game Show. I was lucky enough to be able to attend, and I came across a game with striking visuals. I knew I just had to know more. The Night Witch is a Metroidvania game with some shoot-'em-up elements and deck-building mechanics, which I've had my eye on for some time now. So I'm so glad we're able to finally review it. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Game Club. I'm Graham.
And I'm George.
And this is our review of The Night Witch.
Sinners from resting slashes. Oh, here she comes, the Night Witch. Oh, here she comes, our Night Witch. She fights for those who can. Here she
Okay, well, first things first. We strive to make our reviews as spoiler-free as possible. We'll only be showing footage from the first area of the game, so if you're worried about any visual spoilers, you can rest assured they're as minor as can be. And if you're so inclined, you can simply listen to the review and you'll get all you need out of it. As far as any specific story beats, events, stuff like that, we'll talk about them as abstractly as possible for the sake of the review. And speaking of story, let's start there first. When I played the demo of this game, I really liked most of what I saw, but I felt a sinking feeling in regards to the story's theme. The beginning seemed really cliche, and they laid that cliche on so thick. I even remember telling George, okay, this is either going to be the most generic story in existence, or they're really playing you maybe to subvert your expectations later. Well, we don't want to tell you too much of what will come from the story, nor specific things to expect, but I do want to assure anyone who shared my feelings while playing the demo. If you were initially turned off because the story seemed a little too generic, well, feel free to put those worries to rest. The game delves into themes that are even prevalent today. Science and progress versus nature and harmony. The careless use of resources versus the real and important need for safety and comfort. Much like the themes explored in The Once and Future King, these are also themes that are very complex, but also very important to explore and discuss, and there's a very fine line when broaching these themes as to not come off too preachy, else you're at risk of having your message fall on deaf ears. This game walks that line beautifully. I commend the writers for their work, and the game is so much better for it.
Speaking of themes, I'm so happy about how they wrote the main character, Rain. In fact, the character writing is some of the strongest aspects of the game. There's a lot of character interactions that caught me off guard, some that made me chuckle, and some that are just downright weird. All just superb stuff. Even the portrayal of the main character's husband. In so many stories featuring a strong female protagonist, it's really easy to relegate her significant other to the roles of the bungling buffoon or the annoying chauvinist. Not to say those character archetypes never have their uses, they can certainly enhance the story when used properly, but in this game, the MC's husband was a kind and loving, supportive guy who was also competent and reliable. Call us crazy, but the portrayal of a mature and healthy husband-wife relationship really feels like a breath of fresh air, and it hit the spot. Circling back to Rain, I think she's written just as well. She's strong and capable, but also humble enough to know when to rely on those around her. The writing never employs any cheap pretenses to convince you she's powerful. Rather, they let her actions speak for themselves while also taking great effort to depict her as kind and honorable. I also identified with her feelings of reverence and awe towards the Night Witches that came before. Much like the soft feeling of fascination I felt towards knights when reading through The Once and Future King, Rain has grown up admiring the Night Witches and all they stand for and aspires to be like them. She also wrestles with her feelings of duty and responsibility towards those she swore to keep safe. Aspects of knighthood that I really love and want to see more of. The game then proceeds to take it a step further and provides moral tests for you, the player, to see what you'll do and how you'll adhere to those virtues. There's an aspect of the game tied to this that just knocks it out of the park, and depending on your choices, you may or may not encounter it. I really wish I could get into detail. I won't, because I don't want to spoil it, but boy, is it fantastic. When it happened to me, I was like, what? Wait a second. You're not allowed to do this.
But you can't do this to me. You know how much I sacrificed?
Yeah, we'll leave it at this. The game uses elements of storytelling that only video games can achieve. Undertale is a great example of story choices that affect elements of the game outside of the direct story. No other medium can achieve this, and although the game doesn't do it nearly at the scale and intensity of a game like Undertale, it's always fascinating when these elements are introduced. I really just want to commend Super Mega Team for helping push game storytelling forward. It isn't all sunshine and rainbows though. As great and captivating as the story is, many of its elements feel incomplete or unresolved in one way or another. There are secret notes that you can find throughout the game that provide some extra backstory and lore, so it's possible we missed some things, but we also did a 100% completion. We got all the medals, cards, unlocks, etc., everything. We tried to miss nothing. So while it's definitely possible we missed some of these secret notes, even still, there's some important questions that remain unanswered. There's also a lot of aspects to the lore that were inconsistent, or at least left us wanting more. It's not enough to fully degrade all of the upsides of the story, definitely not, but it dampens the import of some of the things and prevents the whole thing from being as good as it could be.
The Night Witch is part Metroidvania, part shoot 'em up, and part deck builder. We'll talk a bit more about the Metroidvania aspect later, but for now, let's focus on the combat. I will admit, anyone looking for a stringent shmup will probably find better enjoyment elsewhere. However, I had a ton of fun with the combat. It's fluid and fast and feels really good to play. It's not groundbreaking in any way, at least as far as the shmup goes, but it doesn't need to be. It just needs to be good and fun. And even still, there are subtle mechanics that help propel the game forward. For example, when you kill enemies, they'll drop mana which you can use for your next card. But if you take too long, the mana will slowly fall to the bottom of the screen. It's a small and subtle encouragement to collect it as soon as you can. It doesn't change anything in a drastic way, but it's definitely a nice touch. The introduction of cards as spells is also a neat addition, and it's fun to toy around with them to find your favorites.
We're not going to talk about any of the cards in particular, as that self-discovery is really fun, but there are some really cool synergies and builds that you can come up with. In truth, that's basically a requirement for any game with deck building mechanics, but it's nice to see that even if all the cards aren't winners, there's still some interesting things to play with. Your levels are split up into two halves. There are no branching options or anything like that, but rather you get the option to level up your knight side, that being your bullets and their strength and so forth, and leveling up your witch side, that being the effectiveness of your spell cards and the like. It's a straightforward component to be sure, but still more fun to interact with than a straight leveling system where your stats just auto-increase. You increase your levels by increasing your link, the ethereal connection between you and the people of the world. As you continue to do good deeds, rescue hidden NPCs, and even gain characters' trust, their confidence and faith in you will grow, and in turn, so does your link. It's a cool mechanic that feeds back into the story and is a great reminder that the Night Witches are here to serve the people. As far as the levels I chose, I enjoyed playing the game focused primarily on shooting. I just really love bullets. Therefore, I gravitated to leveling up my knight side and to the cards that buffed up my shots. This means that there were some cards I hardly touched, but nonetheless, it was really fun to experiment with cards within that scope.
Another aspect tied to the combat that I really appreciated was the variance in enemy design. The enemies in each area are distinct and unique. It really helps with keeping the game fresh and each area special. Frankly, I really only have one combat complaint. That is the dodge.
Oh, the dodge.
Yeah, it's way too strong. Part of me wonders how much better off some encounters would have been had the dodge come with some sort of cooldown or refresh or something. It's so strong that instead of being an emergency tool to get out of trouble, it devolves into a movement mechanic that's better than the actual character movement itself. Now, did the dodge break my enjoyment of the game? No. The combat is still very enjoyable, but if any part of it was overtuned, I'd have to say it's the dodge.
Not only that, but you end up spamming the dodge out of combat as well. I would have loved it instead if you were out of combat for a couple seconds, you get a speed boost. Without this, the fastest way to travel is to spam dodge, up and down and left and right and all over the place just to get where you want to go. It brings me back to the days of Ocarina of Time, infinitely rolling to get places faster. It's not the fault of the dodge mechanic per se, I wasn't forced to spam it, but it's one of those quality of life things that lots of games have solved already, and I kinda wish this game had included some solution to that. If you're adverse to spamming a dodge ability to get around for 90% of the game, well, something to keep in mind.
Let's take a moment to appreciate this backdrop, with the colors becoming less vibrant as you go further back, intricate windmills slowly scrolling by. Just stunning. Well, in this section, we want to talk about the graphics, art design, and overall presentation of the game. There's not a whole lot to say about the art other than the hand-drawn backdrops are gorgeous. Many of them I would love to have just as a poster to hang up on my wall. There are few games I can think of whose backdrops I found more beautiful, and in this aspect, I think the game will age very well.
Yeah, the art in this game is masterclass. In fact, it was one of the first things that drew me to the game in the first place back when I played it at the Tokyo Game Show. And I also have to mention the card illustrations. They are so well done. I love this kind of thing. Thankfully, the game also runs super smooth. We didn't experience any technical hiccups, and overall performance was totally smooth. For transparency, George and I both have RTX 3080s, but I don't suspect that the performance will be much of an issue on other platforms. Unrelated to performance, one display element that I did think hurt the game overall was the UI. I really feel like the UI was often battling with the gameplay itself, which is odd because each of the elements individually are really well polished. It may go without saying, but you obviously are going to spend a lot of time looking at your character trying to dodge bullets. But the UI elements constantly require you to look away from your character. The timer of buff cards and your health are in the top left corner, while your mana and cards are in the lower right corner. So as you're trying to pay attention, you're constantly having to look away from your character to keep tabs on those other important details. To be fair, the game does introduce something that I thought was ingenious as a way to partially remedy this problem. As one would expect, you can aim manually, but there's an auto-aim mechanic called instinct aiming. With instinct aiming, you will automatically target the nearest enemy. And although the bullets shot this way deal less damage, your attention is at least freed up for other things, which was a sorely needed option given the game's UI.
One thing I'll add is there's times when the game suffers issues of visual clarity when it comes to dodging enemy projectiles, and the UI isn't doing it any favors. This is all even more apparent in a particular area of the game where the enemy bullets are green. Well, guess what's also green? The shards that enemies drop. So as you're trying to keep tabs of everything in your screen, you'll sometimes see green little things that are your peripheral vision and think they're bullets. Turning off the screen shake helps a bit with the visual clarity, but it wasn't enough to overcome the issues with the UI. To be frank, I think the UI in isolation is very good. It just doesn't serve the combat and gameplay very well. The game's still perfectly playable, don't get me wrong, but there's definitely an added burden to the player that does not need to be there. Pivoting a little bit while staying on the topic of the overall presentation, I wanted to briefly yet vigorously touch on the game's music. It is superb. I don't know if it will appeal to everyone as much as it did to me, but some of the songs I could listen to all day on repeat.
You know, recently I've been on a bit of an AI binge, and something funny I discovered was that even for the AI, hands are notoriously difficult to get right. I've heard all my life from various artists how difficult hands are to draw, and along comes AI experiencing the same problem. I find it pretty amusing and interesting at the same time that there's such a universally difficult element when it comes to drawing. Likewise, I find it amusing, interesting, and maybe a bit disappointing that game design has a similar problem. Water levels. Water levels are amongst the hardest to get right. Unfortunately, the water level in The Night Witch was not spared. In fact, I'm not even going to really touch on most of the other levels. I think it's enough to say that they're really good, solid levels, especially the last one. But the water level is so egregious. I disliked it so much, I couldn't go through this review without mentioning it specifically. And listen, it's no secret that I'm not a big fan of Metroidvanias. I do not like to constantly go back to areas with new power-ups, search areas again. I prefer to be super thorough the first time, collect everything I can, rather than being incentivized to go straight through the level without exploring, because I'll just have to come back anyways. George and I differ greatly on our opinion of Metroidvanias, and this game certainly has its backtracking, so I won't fault the levels as a whole due to this general dislike of the genre, but the water level in its own is a totally separate thing. I did not like it at all, especially since the area right before that gave you the dodge mechanic, and just as you start getting used to it, they yank it away, artificially limiting your movement. The level doesn't even stop there though. Then it proceeds to limit the direction at which you can shoot. They constrict you, and only you, to shooting horizontally left and right. It's quite the stark contrast to the 360-degree aiming and movement options you've been enjoying the whole game and will enjoy the whole game after. While it wasn't a total deal breaker, this was definitely my low point.
I will agree that out of all the areas in the game, the water level is by far the weakest. However, I see this level in a different light. I often find it annoying when there's a one-size-fits-all solution in games. Obviously, that's not the case every time, and sometimes I do want that one-size-fits-all approach to my build, gameplay style, etc. But for this game in particular, I really appreciated that there was at least one level that forced me to rethink my deck, because the rest of the levels didn't really do that. The artificial restrictions of the water level made me opt for a different set of cards, namely those with more CC and AoE effects. And I will admit, for someone like Graham who opted to determinedly focus on their night side and really fine-tune their deck to buff up their gun, this level would probably be much more difficult than for someone like myself who took a different approach to their deck. So the argument definitely exists that while it's nice a game is trying to encourage a different approach, it does so at the expense of some playstyles. Which is why I certainly wish there had been a level that did that without the restrictions to character movement and shooting. At the very least though, the attempt was there, and I personally appreciate it for what it's worth, while also wishing the execution had been better. In regards to the rest of the levels, I also think they're strong, solid levels, but I suspect my overall enjoyment of Metroidvanias as a whole probably makes me more friendly to them.
All in all, I'm happy to say I'm very pleased with this game. There are definitely some flaws and things it could have done better, but I refer to this game as a video game frickin' video game. It's just a good old solid game. For anyone wondering, this game will set you back $20, and there's going to be a 10% discount at launch, which I think is more than a fair price. As we mentioned in our last review, every game is going to have different merits that we look at to help us compile our final score and take in all the most important elements of the game. And so these are my scores for The Witch Knight.
I thought a lot about what my score should be, and what finally pushed me over the edge was the fact that this game gave me something that I personally always look out for. The game dealt with some of the themes of knighthood that I really love, and although there were aspects of the game that could have been executed better, I think overall the game's really good, and anyone looking for the same things that I do will really enjoy it. These are my scores.
My final score, going from S down to D, is a very solid B.
And my final score is A. All right, well, our second review under our belt, and it happened to be
Nice.
the Night Witch, man. This was a good game. I had
Yeah.
some decent time with it. There were a couple things that we weren't able to get to in the review. We tried to put it in, but there wasn't a lot of room for it. But one of those things was you get the ability to teleport from the beacon, kind of like your main level teleporter where you can teleport to different levels. You can't teleport within that same level, which is a little bit odd. But yeah, that whole thing's hidden behind an NPC, finding a certain NPC, and then doing their quest line, which is kind of an odd choice. I don't know. It's just really weird.
Yeah, there definitely could have been more options for doing movement around the map. It definitely helped a little bit, but it's certainly a strange way of doing the teleporting and a strange way to unlock it. So overall, it was kind of so-so. The other thing is, there's these medals you collect throughout the game, and I had a similar problem with the exploration that I did with collecting these medals. The medals are meant to be like, once you do an encounter in a certain speed or without getting hit, you get a medal. And unfortunately, at the end of the game, you get access to some really powerful cards, and they kind of just trivialize a lot of the encounters that you do. So the medals you've accumulated almost kind of lose some of their value if you've been working hard to get them as best you can. So not that it outright undid that system, but it definitely lessened the impact of that as well. It just seems like that's kind of a running theme. There's a lot of great things in the game, but then there are other things that kind of lessen the impact over time. And unfortunately, the 100% or getting all of the medals reward at the end of the game was underwhelming, to say the least. I definitely had some pretty decent lows, but again, I think it's a really solid package, so if anyone's curious about it, they should definitely check it out.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that will be it for this one. It was a total joy being able to review this game. We definitely have plans to review many more upcoming games, so if that's something you're interested in, make sure to hit that subscribe button. But with that, we'll see you on the next one.
See you then!